All right, welcome everyone to the June Focus Series. Today we're focusing on planning together with clients. Now, I know when we talk about planning together, we all have our own, processes and client engagement experiences that we take clients through. So we're not going to focus today on, how to do that planning, but rather just cover some practical tips that you can use to set up asset map and target maps before engaging with the client to really create that space for a collaborative planning engagement with the clients. Now, as Benny mentioned, we are going to be covering quite a lot in a short space of time today. So we will send out, a bit of a list of everything we're covering and how to get more information. So as we work through it, maybe think about what are the few things that you want to bring into your process, into your engagements with clients, and just make a note of those to get more information on that after. Now, I wanted to start with talking a little bit about the why, and what we're talking about is sort of shifting from presenting a plan to a client, our plan for them, to creating the plan together with the client. So working through all of the options available to them and actually building the plan with the clients in that engagement. And what are some of the key benefits to doing that? The first is that it really promotes engagement. So clients that are involved in the planning process, they participate more in the conversation, they work through the examples with you and options and what if I do this and what if I do that. So they really become part of the conversation, and it increases that participation and engagement. But it also saves time. Often we present a plan to a client and something comes up in that conversation. That means we sort of have to rework the plan or start again. And that can take, extra steps and extra time. Whereas if we can do it with the client, we can save that additional step. It also enhances the experience for the clients. So clients that are involved in the planning process, they feel more empowered, they feel more educated, they feel more equipped to make the decisions that move them forward. And that creates for a better experience when they leave that session as well. But probably the most important point or the most important benefit is it becomes their plan. So as opposed to our plan for them, by working through it with them and building it together, they take ownership of that plan. And we know that clients that are involved in the planning process, that take ownership of the plan, are far more committed to that plan and are far more committed to taking the actions that were agreed upon together. So they stick to that plan and then make those decisions that move them forward. So that's some of the reasons, why or benefits to planning together with the client. Now I'm going to jump over into Asset Map and take you through just a couple of practical ways that you can set up before, but also have that conversation with the client to really enhance it. Because, we're really good at, covering the technical side and getting into the structures and the technical detail, but how do we facilitate a conversation where we open up the options with the client and explore with them, really get into that creative space and build the plan together. So let's jump across into Asset Map. All right, we have a new sample client today. So we've got the phrases, and we can have a look at their map. So the first few things I want to point out is more around if you're meeting with the client online, or you might be meeting with them face to face and projecting it onto a screen, or even working over an iPad or a laptop. Some of the things we need to bear in mind is how is it coming across to the client in terms of what they can see, especially in those online meetings. Often we're on quite a large screen, the client could be on a much smaller screen. So really just checking in with them first and foremost. Can you see everything clearly? Do I need to increase the zoom? I like to start with 100%, but you can always, alter that depending on how the client is viewing it. So that's the first tip of just checking in with them. Secondly, you'll see that I close the menu tab on the left and the sidebar on the right, and I keep that collapsed until needed, just to use and have more space on the actual screen. Another cool tip is to use F11. So if you hold F11, you'll see what it does is it just full screen modes. The asset map takes away that bar at the top and the bottom, removing those distractions, focusing in on the map itself. So that's a key point. You can hold escape to exit that full screen mode. Okay, so that works on any website as well. Then what you'll see here, looking at the map for John and Chrissy here, so we want to show them their current picture. What are the things that we know about them? But a good point is to add financials for the things that we want to discuss with them. What conversations do we want to open up with the clients, and how do we draw attention to that on the map? So you'll see here I've added, a life cover block to discuss, and I've added an ISA here that I want to talk to Chrissy about. And ways that I can draw attention to that is either putting in the text, let's discuss, or I can even add emojis into those sections that are editable. So here I've just put in a flag, so it draws the client's attention to that. I want to have a conversation about that. But you can easily put in emojis by simply right-clicking on any of these blocks, selecting emoji, and then picking the one that you want to use or searching for a specific one. So I've seen some, really colorful maps with lots of emojis. Great use of them is showing what's in place, what's green, what's red, what's amber, or flagging specific items that you want to explore more and expand that conversation with the client. So that's the first step, is create the current picture, but add on the financials to really, open up that conversation with the client, and use either emojis or the text to just draw attention to this is what we want to talk about. Another great way of drawing attention is using this marker tool. Now, especially if you're engaging with the client online or even, on a screen, you could be talking about something on the left, client could be looking on the right of the screen. The marker is a great way of just guiding the conversation, bringing the client into the conversation, focusing in. Now, I want to talk about this specific thing. Let's open up about that. You can just move, the client's attention towards whatever you're highlighting. If you like keyboard shortcuts, Control M will turn on the marker, and a simple escape will take away all the drawings that you've made on the page. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is layouts. So, for example, we're looking at John and Chrissy here, but you'll see at the top there's also a family trust, and Chrissy has a company, a logistics company. Now, of course, I can deselect at the top and just look at John, or deselect them both and focus in on Chrissy and the business, depending on the conversations that we're having. But when you're engaging and collaborating with a client, you want to reduce the amount of clicking and moving, from screen to screen as much as possible, to really keep the client's attention and focus on that conversation that you're having. And one of the ways you can prepare for an engagement like this is by setting up layouts before the session. So, for example, if I want to have a conversation with John and Chrissy about their picture together, but I also want to talk about Chrissy and her business and how they relate to each other, I can simply click on it, right-click on the screen, and select Layouts. Now I'm going to select that I want to save this current layout, and I want to call it Chrissy and Chrissy Business, and create that layout. Now, the purpose of doing that is that while I'm in the engagement with them, instead of selecting and deselecting at the top of the screen, I can simply flip through the layouts by clicking on layouts and selecting the one I want to view, and then say apply. And now you see we're back on Chrissy and John. If I want to go back to, talking to Chrissy about the business, I can flip to that layout and apply. Now we can have a conversation here about, her and her business. So saving layouts is a great way to save time, and also as a reminder for ourselves of what is the conversation points that we want to talk through with the client around the map, and start by putting that in. Okay. It also means that if I then go to reporting, all of those layouts will show here already. So you can see the default and the layout that I've created. So I can easily select the ones that I want to include in the reports, or deselect the ones that I don't want to include in a particular report. Okay. So that's on layouts. And one other point on layouts is you only have to create them once, and you've got them forever in that household. So it's a good practice to get into, just setting that up beforehand. All right, the next one I want to talk about is just what are the key things to think about in the capturing before we get into the target maps that we've captured here in the map. And the first thing is thinking about if a client is contributing at all to any of the investments that they have. Have I filled in those contributions? So here, if I click on the personal pension, here the client is contributing £6,000 a year. I want to make sure that amount is in. Another key thing to think about is adding in the state pension, as that future income, making sure that's captured before you jump into the target maps and work through it there with them. And then the third thing is just on if their client does have income protection, adding that in and making sure that this frequency is correct, that income protection is monthly and that it will end at a particular age in the future. So just making sure that is all updated correctly. Those are really the three things that we want to check in with before going into target maps. Okay. I'm going to jump across to target maps.
Just 1 second. Something that I find really useful. You were talking about how do we surface conversations with the clients. What you could also do for those 2 blocks is you could hide them. So in other words, that you show the client the view without those topics, and then if it's appropriate, then unhide them and surface them. So maybe just show that quickly, that hide and unhide.
That's a great point, Benny. So if I click on this tick box here, that allows me to select multiple blocks and carry out an action. So like Benny's saying, I can select these 2 and I can simply click the hide option, and then it's going to remove them as if they're not part of the map at all. And I see it now, they're gone. So I can show the client their current picture, and then to draw attention to the items that I want to show, I can simply right click, toggle visibility, and say, I want to see the hidden blocks. And then you see they pop up on the screen. They're still sort of grayed out, but I can always open that up by ticking this tick box again, selecting, and then unhiding those 2. So yeah, that's another great way of just, here's your current picture, but let's have a conversation about these and unhiding those financials to draw attention to that discussion. Okay. Perfect. All right, so once I've checked, gone through this with a client, we've gone through their current scenario, we've highlighted the items that we want to delve into a bit more, in a bit more depth. We've, had that conversation about the ones we want to discuss, either by drawing attention to it with the text or the emojis or the hide and show, and we've worked through the layouts that we want to have that conversation on. Then I can pop across into target maps. So here you'll see I've created a couple of target maps for the family. Got a retirement one, and then I'm looking at loss of life for both John and Chrissy and what that looks like in terms of how funded they are. That's one of the points that we wanted to, highlight with them and have a conversation about. Now, the key conversation here in target maps when you're planning together with a client is around thinking about all the different variables or levers that we have that we can sort of play with or, rank up or down depending on what's important to the client. Now, some of those things might be, we can spend less in retirement, or we can work longer, or we can save more, or we can target a higher return. But some of those levers could be selling a business in the future, or renting out a property later on, or bringing assets from the trust into, the funding that we need. So the idea here in target maps when planning together with the client is to reflect all of those options. How do I open up a conversation with the client around all the different options that's available to them, so that we're together having that conversation on, well, what if I do this? Or what if I do that? And then landing at a place where you've created the plan together and the client is comfortable with the steps they're taking to move forward. So some of the things you can do to really set that up for success up front, if we start with this what you want section, as you'll see here that I've added different line items here under the what you want cash flow required. So I've put in an income at, say, 70% of what they're currently earning, then one at 50%, and one at a set amount of £4,000 a month, or 48,000 per annum. And the idea of setting it all up here is that I can, in the session with the client, simply select or deselect certain options to immediately show the client the impact. So we're working through these scenarios together. And adding additional line items, like what about travel or vehicle purchases or anything else that you think should be a conversation. Creating those lines up front here in the map already, so that when you're sitting down with the client, it's simply just adding in the amount, ticking or deselecting, keeping that, adding and capturing to a minimum in the conversation, but allowing the client to explore the options that they have available. So for example, if the client is here 48% funded at 70%, I can simply deselect that and tick the 50% to immediately show the client how that changes. Look how we get to 67% funded. Or what if we take the next option? How does that change the picture? So key tip here is set up the different options, have them ready to go so that you can select and deselect and show the client the impact. You can also reorder them. So I can move it, sort of up to the top, put travel underneath. Whichever order we put it in here, that's the order it's going to show up in reporting as well as the what it means tab. Right, then I can pop over to what you have. Here are some key things to think about is just that if the client is contributing, are they increasing that contribution over time? Are they committed to, upping that contribution each year by, say, inflation? I can then put that in here. Or have I included inflation in the state pension that is going to increase? So key thing under the what you have section is just checking all of those prior to the session and making sure that you've added in, where it's escalating and where it's not. And again, I can reorder it. I can move it up and say, perhaps I want the pension contributions to be at the top. I can reorder it like that, and it will pull through to the what it means section and reporting in that same order. I also want to start thinking about what assets we can include and what we can't, have that conversation with the client. What about the sale of properties in the future, or what rental income can we bring in? So here we want to talk about what can we include and what can't we, and again, open up that conversation with the clients. Then if we go to the what it means tab, that's going to give us my summary. On the left, this is what we've said we want. On the right, these are the things that we can allocate in the order that we've put them in so that the client can see. That's how we get to 67% funded. But I want to spend a bit of time on the cash flow. We get quite a few questions on, how is the cash flow working? What is it showing me? And how do I have that conversation with the client? So the first thing I want to point out is this graph at the top here is essentially an income statement for the client. Each of the bars shows what is the income required. It's what have you put in that what you want section. And we can see how that is going up each year by inflation as the client's need is growing by that 3% each year. And then the elements that are in color show us how we can meet that income need. So the blue here, that's showing that state pension and the percentage that it's, covering of the total income need. And the green is what we're having to top up from our pot of assets that we've included in this target map. And then at some point that green falls away. We can see that here in 2056. Although the client is still going to receive the state pension, it's not going to be enough to cover the income, and we've run out of additional assets to fund that shortfall. So that's what the graph is telling us at the top. How's it calculating below that? Some key point here to remember is that all of the values in this cash flow are in future value. They're all nominal and in future value. But you'll see here, every year runs from the 1st of January till the 31st of December. So this first year, because we're in 2025 and we're in June already, it's only showing for the remainder of 2025. So what is it showing us here? There's no capital required because the client's not retired yet. We're still in that build-up phase. But this is what the client is contributing to their retirement funds from now until the end of the year. These are the assets that we've earmarked that can be included in this map. So that's our pot of funds, net of tax. And if we add those together, that gives us this value here. This is what's being added into this pot in year one. Then you'll see there's sort of an invisible growth column here, which is showing, what growth we're applying, in this case, 5%, and we get to an end of year total of £470,000. And so that continues year on year. The next year, we add contributions, we add growth to the pot, and we get a new end of year capital balance. And so that continues all the way until the client retires. Now, again, retirement is usually set at an age for the client, and that age is, their birthday could be somewhere during the year. So that first year is offered not for a full year, but for part thereof. So here you can see it's roughly half the year. So it's showing for that first half of the year, the client retires in 2040, they're still contributing to that fund. Then that contribution stops and they start drawing from the capital. but they're also still getting the state pension. So there's income coming in that's funding some of the need, and the rest of the need here, this net amount, is what is going to have to come out of the capital. However, the capital is still growing with growth, but we can see that, it's being reduced over time, and at some point it runs out. And that's the point in the graph here, 81, 2056, that we see this gray part of the bar where the funds can no longer support the income need. Okay? So that's how the cash flow report works. Key point here at the top is that I can expand these sections. I can expand the capital required to see the amounts that I've included. I can expand to see what cash flows are being included and when they're being included. And I can expand the assets that are being brought into this particular target map. I can also edit from here. So I can show the client the impact of different decisions with different options. So for example, if I open up this need and I said, well, what if we kept it at exactly 60,000? How would that impact the graph and the sustainability of that income? So as I update it, so we can see this graph changes. So from here, everything that's part of the map, you don't have to go back into what you want or what you have. You can edit it from here and immediately see the impact on this income graph. Okay. So in this particular target map, that's some of the levers or toggles that we have to work with. It's showing different income streams, including assets or not. But often there's lots more variables that we want to look at with the client. And a great way of doing that is showing different scenarios. So here I can always click clone at the top. And what that's going to do is create an exact copy of this particular retirement scenario. So you can see we've got two here now. They look identical. I can also move them around. So I can change the order of any of these target maps. But let's say for this example, I want to show the client the impacts if we were to, say, target a slightly higher return. And I can open that one up. And I can change it to say, well, what if we targeted a 6% return instead of 5%? Okay, well, then that gets us to 87% funded. Now we can see this page is starting to tell a story. Working through it with the client, if we do this, here's the outcome. Look if we change this. Look if we save more. I can, of course, drag this down so I can have it in the order that I want. And I can rename the scenario. I can rename it by just simply double-clicking on the wording. Here I can say this is, targeting return of 6% and rename it. Yeah. So again, you're telling a story and you're working through those scenarios with the client. And I can create as many of these as I like. So I could clone this scenario, clicking the three dots, selecting clone. Again, it's going to make an exact copy of that. And perhaps here I can show the client the impact of saving more. So still targeting, a slightly higher return, but what if we also saved a bit more? So here I can open up this what you want section. I can add in, what if the client were to save, I'm just going to say 400 per month times 12. Remember that I can always use this as a calculator field. Just typing in equals the amount times 12. So what if the client saves an extra £4,800 per year from now till 65? And let's say they keep, increasing it by inflation each year. What would the impact of that be? Payment, additional savings, and create. There we go. All right, that takes us up to 94. Now I can change the name of this scenario. I can do it while in the target map by clicking on settings. Just go over here and say this is targeting a return of 6% and saving more. And update. So now I've got three different scenarios, so showing slightly different, levers that the client can move to see what is going to work best for them. But this is really where you want to bring the client in, where they are coming up with these options. Well, what if I save an extra 300, or what if I, bring in that some income from my business? How does that change it? Because then they're involved, they're becoming part of the process, they're participating, and it's becoming their plan. But I can also show this as a comparison. So I can select these three scenarios here by checking this box here on the right, and I can tick this compare button. And that's just going to bring them up next to each other. Again, just facilitating that conversation of if we do this, if we do that, what changes do you feel we should make? What, actions are we committing to? Really just reflect that and, show the client those options in a nice visual, clean way where they feel empowered to make those decisions that are going to move them forward. All right, so we've gone through all of that on target maps, remembering that we want to explore the options. We can either do it by, adding different options to the what you want section or creating different scenarios for them. How do we bring it all together at the end of that conversation with the clients? And one of the ways that we can do that is by showing the map here that you've seen. We can go back to asset map and just reiterate the conversation we had here. These are the things we started with. These are the conversations we had. And then I can pop open the sidebar and I can view the target maps right here whilst working through the map. And this is a great way of just closing the discussion. We explored these different scenarios. And let's say, for instance, this is the one that the client wants to sort of focus on. I can even go ahead and select that as a target. And that just means, if we've got lots of scenarios that I've created for a client, that I can earmark one to say, this is the one we're working towards. This is the one we've agreed to do together. So I can target that. I can also, by the way, click on this little eye. And what that'll do is just highlight what is being brought into this target map. Which investments and incomes are we using in this specific target map? So that's just a nice way, again, of reiterating what is the plan going forward. Then I can also use this pin function. And what that does is it just moves target maps to the top. So perhaps we've had this retirement conversation and we've explored different options, but I maybe still want to have this loss of life conversation. We can see they're quite underfunded in that space. I can then pin that and we'll just move that target map to the top of the list of target maps as something that we want to engage more on. Maybe not in this session, maybe in the next session, but at least we know we've earmarked what is our next conversation going to be. And then these buttons at the top allow us to just toggle from this long list of target maps into, which is the ones that we've agreed to, which is the ones that we're targeting, and which is the ones that we've pinned for future conversations or that we need to tackle next. It's just a great way of sorting through lots of different options around what you want to target and what the next conversation is going to be. And then another way of ending off this session is really adding in notes. So we know that if we select any individual, any financial on the page, we have a notes tab here on the bottom line. So now while I'm working through this with the client, I could be capturing notes here under the individuals or under any of the financials on the page as well. And a key point now with sidebars, if I have notes open here for an individual and I select an investment, it will automatically open notes on that right-hand side. So I can easily go in and update to clarify the conversation, add in the action steps that we want to take. And I can finish the conversation and, with the client by showing, here's all the notes, what we've agreed to do and how we're taking that step forward. Okay. All right. Jump back over to the presentation. And just close out for the day. So in closing out, I really wanted to just reiterate what are some of those benefits. The idea of today's session is to think about what are the things we can do to really set up asset map and target map prior to an engagement to the client to really bring them in to that planning conversation, to ensure that the client is engaging, that they're working through those options with them, that they're sharing what works for them, and that really by the end of it, it becomes their plan. They take ownership of it, they committed to it. It's the plan that we created together. Thank you very much for your time today.